These are two of the most expensive mountain bike brakes that money can buy. On the left I have the Trickstuff Maxima, which has been frequently cited online as the world's most powerful brake since its launch back in 2018. And on the right I have the Intend Trinity, designed by a former Trickstuff employee for over 5 years and launched in 2023 as their first production brake ever. I've spent a considerable amount of time riding with both of these brakes over the past year, and today I'm going to pit them against each other to figure out which German hyper brake, if any, you should buy, and crown the best brake that I have ever ridden. Let's get into it. I purchased these Intend Trinities at their full retail price directly from Intend last year, and I've been running them on my DV8 Claymore ever since. I recently borrowed these Trickstuff Maximas from a viewer of my channel that you may know as Eric from BCPOV. No money exchanged hands, and I will be selling them on his behalf after I have completed one more comparison video. Everything said in this video is my opinion. I have no professional affiliation with either Intend or Trickstuff, neither of them have any say as to the content of this video, and I stand to gain no monetary or in-kind compensation from either of these two brands. This video does have a sponsor though, and that would be me, or rather Doggo Products. If you're looking for the ideal Christmas present for the dog owner in your life, give the gift of convenience with our Canadian design gear that aims to make your life easier. Get 20% off and free shipping on our hands-free adventure belt, leash, and collar bundle using the discount code DaleStone20 at the link in the video description. Free your hands and unleash the fun today. I've uploaded dedicated videos on both of these brakes independently, so today we're going to focus on comparing them in great detail, but it's worth checking out both of those videos afterwards. Let's quickly recap what these brakes are and what they promise to offer. The Maxima and the Trinity are both 4-piston mineral oil brakes. The Trinity is recommended for downhill, enduro, and trail riders, and the Maxima is rated for ASTM Category 5 riding, which is categorized as extreme and features speeds in excess of 40 km/h on rough trails and jumps and drops in excess of 122 centimeters. There really is nothing quite like German efficiency. The Trinity is compatible with rotors between 1.7 and 2.3 millimeters thick, and the Maxima claims to be compatible with rotors thicker than 1.6 millimeters. They don't specify an upper bound, but the thickest rotor that Trickstuff offers is 2.05 millimeters thick. I would not expect them to be compatible with Hope's 3.3 millimeter vented rotors, and I would not assume that they are compatible with 2.3 millimeter rotors without confirming beforehand given their age. The Trinity has 4 17mm pistons, and the Maxima has 2 17mm and 2 16mm pistons. Both brakes have been tough to obtain since their releases. The Trinities have dropped in exclusive batches of 50 or so brakes in random intervals every few months because Intend will simply not take pre-orders on principle, opting only to sell assembled brakes once they are ready to be shipped. The Maximas have been equally notorious, with an expensive pre-order deposit and a long lead time, sometimes measured in years, being a standard pathway to ownership, though it looks like they have improved their supply chain immensely over the past year. And both are proudly designed and manufactured in Germany, though they do not shout about that on their respective websites as much as I believe that they used to, and they probably should. Clearly, these are both big, capable brakes designed to stop the heaviest of riders on the steepest of trails, with an aura, cult following, and build quality to match. But with all of these details comes a hefty price tag, one that you may not be ready to hear if you've never heard of these brakes before. Let's start off with the cheaper brake. The Intend Trinity retails for €798 excluding VAT, without their optional refrigerator cooling fins, which seem like more of a fashion statement to me than a performance benefit, especially at my weight. This is approximately 1,185 Canadian dollars, or 850 football fields. If you include the cooling fins, your total increases by €76, 112 Canadian, or 81 bald eagles. This is a lot of money for brakes, and it's almost 2.5 times more than what you can find a set of Shimano XTM 8120s for. But in comparison to Trickstuff, Intend brakes truly look like a bargain. The Trickstuff Maximas are available for purchase directly online for €1,092, excluding VAT. This is approximately 1,620 Canadian, or 1,164 Big Macs. This makes the Maximas 37% more expensive than the Trinities, and almost 3.5 times more expensive than XTM 8120s. But this is the last time that we will mention the price difference between these two brakes before the conclusion of this video, as performance is a much more important indicator than price when you are nearly an order of magnitude more expensive than the best budget brakes out there. It's also worth noting that somehow neither of these brands include free shipping to North America at these price points. So first, why would anyone choose to buy either of these boutique brakes over the wide range of third-party brakes that offer the majority of their performance at a fraction of their price? There are a few main reasons that immediately come to mind. The first is that you want the best riding performance that you can possibly have. I've tested an overwhelming majority of the brakes on bikes today by market share, and I can confirm that the two brakes we are discussing today would be my top 2 picks for on-trail ride performance. This is the category that I fall into. Mountain biking is my primary hobby by quite some margin, and I wanted to treat myself to something truly special for passing 100,000 subscribers on this channel, so I invested my money into a brake set that I knew I'd love and be able to ride for years to come. The second reason would be you want to support local or or Western companies that prioritize local or Western manufacturing wherever possible. There's often a premium associated with this value, but to many people, including myself, supporting brands in your figurative backyard is worth paying this extra price for. Voting with your money is one of the most important tools that you have in life in general, and supporting brands with values that you share is the best thing that you can possibly do. The third reason is that you prioritize top-tier build quality and product support. Although their service networks are not as developed as some of the bigger players, especially in North America, small independent companies often provide top-notch warranty and product support in a way that feels significantly more human than you may be used to. A strong build quality also correlates very closely with product consistency and reliability, which are key aspects of any safety-critical bicycle component like a brake set. My Trinities have had literally perfect reliability with zero service required over an entire year of riding. And the fourth reason is that you just want to feel important. You enjoy consuming luxury goods, filling cavities, and driving up the price of home ownership in Canada's hottest markets. You often order products based solely on their price tag, and like it or not, there is a special feeling about showing up to the trails, knowing that you have something special or rare to enjoy for yourself. I get it, I don't agree with you, but I do get it. Now, before we hop onto the comparison, I'd like to briefly discuss the concept of diminishing returns. Nobody expects a $600 pair of brakes to be 3 times better than a $200 set of brakes, and you shouldn't expect a pair of $1,200 brakes to be twice as good as that $600 pair. That's just simply not how any of this works, and in reality, I'd place these premium products at close to 10 to 20% more enjoyable to use on a day-to-day basis. There are 2 price points that stand out to me as being good money for value. The first of which is around 300 Canadian. Below this price, brakes are often dangerous to use and or unfit for the trails that I ride. The second is the $650 to $750 range. For many people, this is still a lot of money to spend on brakes, but in my opinion, this is the sweet spot for ultimate performance per dollar. There are several excellent brakes that play in this range from brands such as 𝙎𝙊𝘾𝙄𝘼𝙍, Hope, Shimano, and Lewis. Now, when you go beyond this bracket, you'll see that performance improvements start to slow significantly. But these brakes are definitely better in most aspects, and it's time to go through the details of that now. Let's first start with what people want to hear, and what I believe is less important having ridden both of these options, and that is on-trail performance. Both of these brakes provide fantastic on-trail performance for almost every rider, of almost every ability level, in almost every terrain. The Trinities and Maximas are both incredibly versatile, consistent, and trustworthy brakes by every metric, and they are my 2 favorite brakes on the trail. Both of these brakes have incredible power when you need it, and incredible repeatability to avoid you ever having to consciously think about what your brakes are doing as you're going down the trail. They're intuitive to use within their first few rides, without ever wandering, rattling, or doing anything unpredictable at all. They're both phenomenal brakes, and they're both completely overkill for the needs of most riders around the world. But the mountain bike community is a stubborn bunch, and despite many other products being better suited for their needs, purchasing bikes and components aspirationally is one of our all-time favorite pastimes. If you live in a flatter part of the world or are an intermediate rider, do yourself a favor and buy something less powerful. But as Hope says, what can do more can also do less, and who am I to argue against unregulated free market capitalism? If you live in a part of the world where the trails are steep and sustained enough to make use of all the power on tap, then the biggest difference that you will notice between these 2 brakes is how the power is applied at the caliper, relative to how the force is applied at the lever. It's time for a quick graph. The Trinities have a noticeably lighter initial dead stroke than the Maximas, the lowest I've ever measured, and it feels nearly frictionless with the 4 bearings in the lever. Although the Maximas have a heavier dead stroke lever feel than the Trinities, they are still lighter than average and not of any particular reason for concern. You can see this on the graph as the x-intercepts along it. The Maximas have an incredible amount of power available with relatively little force applied, but they are also progressive in a way that allows the force to be gradually applied toward the beginning of the lever stroke, allowing for finer brake control under low braking load situations. Typically, when reviewers say that something has a lot of power, this translates to a steeper slope on this graph, or a higher force output relative to the force input. And when reviewers say something has good modulation, this translates to a shallower slope on this graph, or a larger difference in input force for a given difference in output force. The Trinity has plenty of top-end power, but it has a considerably more linear braking feel. This results in excellent modulation throughout the range of usable powers, with a small sacrifice to ultimate top-end power. Top-end power is important under heavy braking situations, particularly if you are a heavier rider who has an abundance of traction on your trail or braking surface of choice. But for the most part, modern brakes are strong enough to lock up your wheels in most situations, and more power won't do anything productive. This graph is of course an approximation of what I've felt throughout my hundreds of hours of testing various brakes, and although I'm sure the actual curves are significantly more complex than this, I feel that this simplified representation is the best way to convey information to my audience. This graph gets considerably more interesting when you start to look at my favorite topic, which is rider fatigue. If you have ever experienced finger, hand, wrist, arm, or shoulder pain after an extended period of riding, then you'll know exactly what I mean, and it's not necessarily brakes, but that is often the leading factor here. Now, compared to most other brakes out here, the Trinity and Maxima are two of the least fatiguing options available on the market today, to the point where fatigue is unlikely to be a factor in your purchasing decision, but it is something that is worth talking about. Rider fatigue correlates directly with how far to the right you have to go on this graph as you're riding along. Most riders never utilize the full power of their brake set by squeezing as hard as they can on the grippiest surface imaginable, and I would argue that non-professionals are often utilizing less than 50% of this maximum power through more frequent, lighter, and moderate braking loads. The amount of power that you command on this graph is completely dependent on your weight, ability, and trail demands. In my experience, I found that the Trinities were slightly less fatiguing to use than the Maximas on a wide variety of trails that I tested on. If you weigh less than I do, or you're a less experienced rider, or you live in a flatter part of the world, you will likely arrive at the same conclusion as I did and experience less fatigue with the Trinities. If you're a heavier human, a professional racer, or only ride the absolute steepest of trails around, you may very well find the Maximas to be your less fatiguing option. The fact that I am so close to the break-even point between these two brakes makes for a pretty useful comparison between yourself and myself, given that you know my 62 kilogram weight, ability levels, and trail preferences quite well by now. The other point worth mentioning about this graph is that the Trinity has better modulation for almost all of the lever forces applied, depicted by a shallower slope throughout this graph. The Trinity simply has the best modulation that I have ever experienced, which makes brake control specific trail features a lot safer and more enjoyable, such as rock rolls, slabs, steep chutes, wet bridges, and wet routes. Being able to get closer to that limit of traction through excellent modulation allows you to ride these features as slowly as in control as possible, which is a big plus in my books. There isn't a widely available brake that I can easily compare the Trinity's modulation to, apart from maybe TRP, though I don't have enough experience to be confident with that analogy. The Maxima's aggressive ramp up in power results in noticeably worse modulation in comparison, where a smaller change in input force at the lever results in a larger change in output force at the caliper. The Maximas are still very intuitive brakes to use, and equally safe in almost every situation, but the force required feels more on-off, like a light lever version of the SRAM Maven, or a very well bed-in Shimano brake with metallic brake pads. To some extent, this is all rider preference, but if you don't need the top-end power that the Maximas have to offer, which I argue the majority of riders out there don't, I think the Trinities win in Graphland for their superior modulation and lighter deadstroke. There are anecdotes online of riders that are over 100 kilograms preferring the Trinities to the Maximas too. Now, moving away from graphs, there are a few more on-trail differences between these two brakes that are worth discussing. The first is that the only adjustment that either of these brakes have to offer is lever reach. There is no leverage ratio adjustment or bite point adjustment present, and neither brake's levers will move outward in the event of a crash to spare your fingers. The Maximas have a toolless reach adjustment dial hidden behind the lever blade that allows for quick and convenient trailside adjustments. The Trinities have a small set screw near the pivot of the lever blade that requires the use of a small hex key to adjust your reach. This isn't the end of the world, as you should always carry Allen keys on your rides, and it doesn't matter one bit once you've passed your initial setup phase, but it is worth mentioning here. The lever clamps are a similar story. The Maximas have a 3-piece clamp design that allows you to install and remove the brakes from your handlebars without interfering with anything else in your cockpit, and they do so using standard hex head machine screws that are easy to use. This means that it is also easy to adjust how far inboard or outboard they sit on your handlebars by loosening and tightening a single bolt. The Trinities have a 1-piece design, which is aesthetically beautiful and very lightweight, but it means that you'll have to remove everything on your handlebars, including your grips, shifters, and dropper levers, in order to slide the brake levers off of your handlebars. This is not something that I've ever had to do, but it is an additional hassle if you have to remove your brakes for any reason. The more annoying part of this is that Intend has designed their clamp to use 2 tiny T10 screws for clamping onto the handlebar. Many of the most common multi-tools available, including all of the ones that I own, do not have a T10 driver, so you may have to carry a loose T10 wrench or purchase a new multi-tool for additional peace of mind. You also have to remember to tighten and loosen 2 T10 bolts each time, which takes slightly longer, so the Maximas win in this regard. Although neither lever is particularly grippy through the use of dimples or textured surfaces in its design, the Trickstuff lever blade does have a smoother surface finish than the Intend lever blade, mostly due to the lack of subtle CNC toolpath marks that are present on the Intend design, making the Trickstuff lever blade slipperier under wet, cold, or sweaty usage. At this price point, I do expect better from both brands. The final on-trail point is the deadstroke travel distance. Since neither of these brakes have a bite point adjustment feature, the length of the deadstroke is determined by the brake's design, the quality of your bleed, and the thickness of your brake pads remaining. Trickstuff claimed that they designed the Maxima to feature their shortest possible deadstroke, and it's disappointingly average compared to the rest of the market against this claim, and consistent between my levers, which validates that they were likely bled correctly. Intend also claims that they designed the Trinity to have the shortest deadstroke possible, and I find that to be absolutely the case. The Trinity has the shortest deadstroke of any brake that I've ever used, excluding intentionally overfilled ones, which feels fantastic and further helps to reduce rider fatigue just that extra little bit. In fact, my Trinities still have a shorter deadstroke than the these Maximas do, despite having never been bled in over 1750 kilometers and being on the original brake pads. A short dead stroke is a nice attention to detail and something that I wouldn't want to give up if I had the choice. In my opinion, the Trinities edge out the Maximas with their superior on-trail performance characteristics for the majority of riders, though the heaviest riders may require the Maxima's top-end power, and I do understand that personal preference definitely plays a role here, and I would happily use either brake. But once we move off of the trails into the workshop, we will start to see some more important differences that may sway your purchasing decision. The build quality of both of these brakes is fantastic. The machining on both is a work of art, and there are no functional or aesthetic defects to mention whatsoever, though this is certainly an expectation at this price point. Both brakes are only sold as complete brake sets, and there is no way to purchase only the lever or caliper of either system. Intend makes the reasoning for this decision very clear on their website, saying that they only offer our complete brake system to make sure that everything works as it should, which I do agree with. Both brakes are compatible with ring clamp shifters from both of their major drivetrain brands, and both offer direct mount adapters for SRAM shifters to clean up your cockpit even further. Trickstuff also offers adapters for both 12-speed and 11-speed Shimano shifters, which are iSpec EV and iSpec 2 respectively, whereas Intend does not currently appear to do so. Owners have mentioned online that the Wolf-Toothed adapter is compatible with some minor modifications, but is ultimately buyer beware here without Intend's OEM approval. The Maximas are available in two colors, severely dehydrated yellow and black as of this year. The Trinities are only available in one color, with an anodized black body and a lever blade that matches their suspension offerings. Having one or two color options is fine, but far from the norm in the aftermarket brake segment. Trickstuff has highly detailed rebuild guides available online for both their caliper and lever independently, allowing you to easily service either component at home without having to reach out first. They also offer replacement seal kits and even pistons available for purchase through online retailers. Intend does not have publicly accessible rebuild instructions available for the Trinity so far, nor can you purchase spare parts without first reaching out directly. Both brands have excellent bleeding documentation available online, with clear videos and written instructions ensuring that the process is as easy and painless as possible. Both brakes fall under the mineral oil umbrella, which I find more enjoyable to service than the more corrosive dot fluid alternatives, but there is also a bit of nuance here. Trickstuff uses bionol in their brakes, a vegetable-based oil that they claim to be fully biodegradable, with a very high boiling point that is also suitable for low-temperature environments, though I could not find a specific temperature range cited anywhere on their website. Intend uses Putoline 2.5 weight mineral oil, which is originally a damping oil for forks, and they claim this has great properties in terms of general viscosity, temperature-dependent viscosity, and boiling point. Intend claims the Trinities will perform like new down to at least minus 20 degrees Celsius. So both brands use a proprietary mineral oil, but Trickstuff specifically mentions in their bleeding documentation that you must only use new bionol when bleeding your brakes, whereas Intend mentions that although the Trinity was designed around and they will always recommend Putoline 2.5, they specifically state that any regular brake mineral oil like Shimano should work. It's very nice not to be tied to a proprietary standard in a pinch, and not having to potentially risk your warranty with a non-OEM fluid. Bleeding the brakes is where we run into what is possibly the biggest difference between these two brakes. The most commonly cited and largely only complaint that I can find about the Maximas online is that they can be finicky and inconsistent to bleed. Although Imbi and myself did not find this to be an issue, it appears to be a common enough sentiment online that suggests the Maximas may be more difficult or complex than average to bleed. Thankfully, the Trinity is the complete opposite here. Intend markets their Trinities as having their painless bleed technology, and they claim that the Trinity is the most easily bleedable brake in the world. There is only one connecting channel for brake fluid inside, there are no dead corners, there is no secondary chamber anywhere. The fluid you press in at the bottom will flow through every single part of the hydraulics and come out at the top of the brake master cylinder. I found this to be entirely accurate, and the Trinities were genuinely the easiest brake to bleed that I have ever encountered. It is a comically simple process that would be difficult to mess up, it takes very little time to complete, and it has provided the most consistent lever feel over 1750 kilometers of riding that I have ever experienced. I hate bleeding brakes with a passion, and it's part of the reason why Imbi helps me out so much with these brake reviews, and I genuinely did not mind bleeding the Trinities. There is no competition in this category from Trickstuff or any of the other brands available. Let's work our way from the lever toward the caliper and talk about the brake hoses next. Intend ships their Trinities with their own brake hoses, which they note are basically equivalent to the Shimano BH-90 standard, except they use a different sized O-ring that must be paired with the correct hose. These brake hoses are 5.0mm in outer diameter and extremely plain otherwise. Trickstuff appears to ship the majority of their Maxima brakes with Goodrich braided steel hoses. Apart from looking cool, Trickstuff claims that they are the highest quality brake hose, extremely low expansion for a very firm bite point, turn in smallest radius, stands highest mechanical and thermal loads, all of which appear to be nice benefits on the surface. The problem is that these Goodrich hoses have an outer diameter of 5.8mm instead of 5.0. A decent portion of bicycle OEMs design the internal routing on their frames to accommodate a standard 5.0mm brake hose, and generally the tighter the tolerance to this number, the less potential there is for internal rattling within the frame. This means that the Goodrich hoses are incompatible with the internal routing on many modern mountain bike frames, which is arguably a larger problem than the ones that they claim to solve. This was not an issue on either of my Deviate frames, but I'd recommend researching the bike that you have to ensure compatibility before purchasing these. Trickstuff also offers the Maximas with black Kevlar brake hose options, which appear to have an outer diameter of 5.1mm. This will likely be compatible with the majority of internally routed frames, although this model appears to be slightly rarer, and I've yet to see one in the wild or at any of the trade shows that I've attended. Intend is also quite clever. Instead of speccing a Goodrich hose to allow small bend radii in the line, they've designed their levers in a way that allowed the brake hose to spin freely to its lowest energy, smoothest spline state while connected. This tidies up your cockpit cable routing nicely, and you won't have to adjust the angle of either of your brake hoses afterwards, as they'll naturally rotate their way into their ideal position. Moving down to the caliper, it's time to talk about the final noteworthy difference between these two brakes. Trickstuff ships their Maximas with their own Trickstuff branded 730 series brake pads. At first glance, this appears to be a proprietary shape, which is not unheard of in the third-party brake space. But that is not the case here. The Trickstuff 730 series is based on the Hope V4 brake pad standard, which historically has not been the easiest thing to find out through Trickstuff's website. Hope V4 shaped brake pads are not uncommon, but not every service shop will have them in stock, which could lead to a bit of a headache if you need some brake pads in a pinch, like on vacation for example. There are a few brands that manufacture brake pads with the Hope V4 standard, so it is decently well supported, but it is clear that Trickstuff would prefer that you purchase their own brand by not mentioning this compatibility on the Maxima's product page, and instead only opting to list 730 Power Plus. For what it's worth, the Trickstuff brake pads were the easiest brake pads that I have ever had to bed in, which is a big deal when running aggressive brakes at my light weight. But Intend definitely made the better call here in my opinion. They ship their Trinity brakes with their own White Magic brake pads, which I believe have been specifically chosen for their high power and low wearing characteristics. I believe that these have been purchased from an overseas vendor and laser etched with Intend's branding. These brake pads are also fantastic, and the pads have already far exceeded my usual pad replacement interval of around 1250 to 1500 kilometers, and will likely break the 2000 barrier. The important difference here is that Intend clearly mentions on their product page that they utilize the Avid code or SRAM code brake pad standard, so you have a wide choice of compatible brake pads. This is a fantastic design decision, as the code standard is likely the best supported brake pad standard in the entire industry. Riders should have no issues sourcing replacement brake pads from a multitude of brands at any time, anywhere in the world, and it's nice that Intend spells out their compatibility so clearly on multiple Trinity related web pages. The final piece of this puzzle is the availability for both of these brakes. It's worth noting that neither brand has a significant North American presence, so spare or warranty parts availability may be slower than we are used to from brands with established distribution networks. Trickstuff has been plagued by supply issues for the majority of the years that the Maximas have been out, but they seem to have caught up with demand over the past year and are even showing that a few models are in stock and ready to ship within a few days. It is unclear whether this improved availability comes from an increased supply or a reduced demand, but I would argue it is likely a combination of both of the factors. And perhaps this is a result of DT Swiss acquiring them in 2022. But it does appear that you can send Trickstuff your life savings today and receive a Maxima in a reasonable amount of time, so that's very good news. Intend is a different story here. They have honorably decided that they do not wish to pre-sell brakes that they do not have, and as such they will not accept pre-orders at all. Instead, Intend has decided on releasing batches of approximately 50 brakes at random intervals with a few days to a week of notice on their social media channels and email newsletter. Their first batch sold out almost instantly, so I set 3 alarms before 3 AM Vancouver time and refreshed their website like an addict in order to secure myself a set from batch 2, which also completely sold out within 2 or 3 minutes. These are simply not easy brakes to get your hands on. I don't necessarily agree with their very conservative strategy for growth, and I think that Intend has significantly more international market appeal than they may be aware of, but I can respect Cornelius's desire to grow Intend slowly and predictably, and appreciate that he limits orders to a maximum of 2 brake sets per person. He already has significantly more demand for these brakes than he can keep up with, and this video will absolutely add oil onto that fire. I hope that he's able to scale Intend at a sustainable rate, but sooner rather than later. And until that happens, the Trinities will continue to be one of the rarest brakes in existence. Overall, both brakes are fantastic performers, and go to show that money can actually buy happiness. I can see why some riders would initially prefer the brutal power of the Maxima, as it is truly unmatched, but the Trinities aren't exactly lacking in that department either. I believe that the Trinities have the edge in ride performance over the Maximas due to their extremely light lever action and superior modulation, while still being more than powerful enough for skilled riders up to at least 100 kilograms in weight. And once we start to look at the complete ownership experience, my recommendation for them becomes even clearer. The Trinities are the easiest brake to bleed that I have ever encountered and don't strictly require a proprietary oil. They utilize one of the most popular brake standards in existence for maximum owner convenience, and they've been designed with hassle-free internal cable routing in mind, with their standard diameter hose and even smaller fitting. The Trickstuff Maximas are definitely my second favorite brake, but regardless of price, I would rather own the Trinities. So it's a nice bonus that they also happen to be nearly $500 cheaper than the Maximas too. The worst part about the Trinities by far is getting your hands on them in the first place, which is no easy task, but one that I argue is absolutely worth the effort, as the Trinities have successfully ruined all other brakes for me. Well played, Bond villain Cornelius Capfinger, well played.